Hello, it's Joel here and welcome to The Kill Room. On today's episode we are taking a look at the harrowing story of Tom Lionel Burns, better known as the Hunchback Cannibal Killer from Barrow in Furness. He was responsible for taking the lives of two young girls. So for the first time ever, we are going to dive deeper than anybody has ever been with this heartbreaking story. And not only that, you are going to get to see the world's first full colour image of Tom Lionel Burns. So with that in mind, let's get into The Kill Room. Before this podcast begins, I do have to mention that listeners' discretion is advised due to the graphic nature of the content. This podcast does mention the death of people, so if this is not what you're expecting, then switch the podcast now. Let's face it, you are here because you are looking for murder. You, my friend, have found the right place. If it's unsolved murders, or old murders, or crazy weird murders, or murders that slipped under the radar type murders, or even murders, you've found us. Welcome to the True Murder Pod. Here at the True Murder Pod, we are going to be covering some crazy stories from all over the world, including killings that you will never have heard of, but I guarantee you that if it is on this pod, then it is worth listening to, so make sure you hit subscribe right now. Here's a little fact. Did you know the most common method used for illegal killings, meaning non-professionals such as police, is with a handgun? Coming up very shortly, we are going to be looking at the horrific story of Tom Lionel Burns, a 71-year-old man who killed two 5-year-old girls. But before we get into it, here's a little question I have for you listeners at home. How many people does a serial killer have to kill before being considered a serial killer? I'm going to give you this answer at the end of the story, but make sure you don't skip to the end for the answer, as the story is chilling. It sounds a little bit more like a horror story than a murder, but everything that you are about to hear is real and it did happen. Before the story, here is a quick question. Do you know the name of the first ever recorded serial killer? His name was Gilles de Rais, and he was born in 1440 in France. He was Jean of Arc's right-hand man, and he led armies into battle. But all of this is shadowed by the murders that he confessed. His spree of murders went on for many, many years. He was a very wealthy man, and he paid his servants to kidnap the children and bring them back to his castle. Once the children were kidnapped, de Rais would hang the children from ropes before abuse and torture took place. He would then mutilate their bodies, and his servants would dispose of the remains by spreading them in various fire pits throughout his castle. It is also told that the servants would go missing over time. Could this have been to keep the stories away from the streets? De Rais murdered approximately 140 boys until he was finally tortured himself and burnt. Everything here has been fully researched, so you know that you are getting a full, authentic, real deal. On today's episode, we are going to be taking a look at a very dark, very sad, and a very twisted case. This is the story about a man who sexually assaulted two 5-year-old girls. He killed them, and then he finally cut parts off them that he cooked and he ate. We are going to travel back in time to the year 1958, and we are going to travel far north west of England into a little shipbuilding town called Barrow in Furness, which is situated in Cumbria. In 1958, Barrow was considered to be in Lancashire. It's June 11th, 58, and two friends, Lavinia Murray and Sheila Barnes, who are just 5 years old. They're playing with a couple of other friends on the streets, probably having a really nice time. Unfortunately, Lavinia and Sheila did not make it home. It's rumoured that Lavinia and Sheila heard the sound of a piano coming from a house. As far as the community and the police were concerned, these two girls were just missing. The hopes were high that these two girls would be found. However, after searching high and low, including Barrow Park, which is a 45-acre piece of land, the girls did not show up. The following morning, a policeman knocked on the number 32 York Street and he did not receive an answer, so he left it for a while and he went back. He knocked again and the door opened. The police were greeted by a short hunchback man, and that man was called Tom Burns. The policeman asked if Tom could help them in their inquiries looking for the two young girls, and Tom Burns said that he could not. He said, "No, I'm sorry, I cannot. I only wish I could. It's a bad business." Tom then told the police that he had not left the house the previous day and that he went to bed at 5 p.m. because of his ill health. The police pushed Tom and asked if he had any outhouses, and Tom told the officer he did and that he had checked it in the previous evening and there was nobody in it. One question to ask ourselves here is, if Tom never left his house and went to bed at 5 o'clock, then how did he know there were two missing girls? Why would he be checking his outhouse for any missing people? The following morning at 10:25 a.m, another policeman called again at 32 York Street, and Tom Burns opened up the door and let the officer in. Tom Burns led the officer into the kitchen, and the policeman outright asked him about the girls, and Tom Burns replied, "I heard about it, it's terrible. Somebody must have took them away in the car." The police officer could sense that Tom Burns was agitated, so the officer decided to go in with the question, and he outright asked Tom Burns if any children had knocked on his door. Tom Burns then explained that he lived alone and kept his house locked up. The policeman then decided to take a look around Tom's house. He started downstairs and then asked Tom if they could take a look in the shed. Tom explained that there was no point because he had already looked. The officer spotted a recent excavation, and when he questioned Tom what this excavation was for, Tom pointed to some bulbs and told him that they had rotted. In actual fact, the hyacinth bulbs that he pointed to were not rotten at all. This of course raised even more suspicion within the police officer. He quickly made his way back into the house. He knew there was nothing downstairs, so he decided to make his way up, and as he made his way up, he could hear Tom Burns pleading with him not to go any further. The policeman obviously made his way up the stairs, and as he did, that's when he heard Tom Burns say the words, "Oh, I'm buggered now." Once the officer was up the stairs, he turned his head into another room, and that is where he saw the two mutilated bodies of the two young girls. The police officer ran back down the stairs towards Tom, shouting, Why? Tom said, "I feel weak, let me sit down." "Why have you done this?" said the officer. Tom replied, "Sex made me do them in." Tom Burns proceeded to talk to the police officer, and he said, "I was playing the piano when they came in. I showed them how to play. They came in here and I undressed them. I was sitting in this chair. They laughed when I felt their bottoms. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up a knife off the table and I just cut the ginger girl's throat. The other one laughed at me. She was standing over there. I cut her throat." John told the officers that a man called Jose Fothergill had helped assist him with the murders. However, this was proven to be untrue and was not the case. Both girls' lives were taken by having their throats cut, and both had severe wounds including knife cuts to their genitalia. Sheila had swollen eye sockets which indicated she was crying at the time of her murder, and Lavinia Murray had been almost decapitated. In his final statement, he said that he felt their bottoms and their privates and that he had kissed them. He said that he tried to put his privates into them, but it would not work. He said he then took them upstairs but could not remember if he had sexual intercourse with them after they were dead. He said that on the second day, he had cut off one of the girl's feet, which he was planning to roast and eat. Burns was trialled on October the 21st, 1958 at Barrow in Furness Magistrates Court. He was found unfit for trial due to insanity. It was reported that an army of over 100 Barrow in Furness residents booed and shouted at Tom Lionel Burns, aged 71, as he left the Barrow Magistrates Court. Burns was then driven to Walton Jail in Liverpool, when Tom Lionel Burns stated, "I was playing the piano and the girls came in." And this is what the the media reported to be a fact. But now, let's correct history. Tom Lionel Burns proceeded to explain that he touched them, and they laughed, almost as if his victims wanted him to touch them. I don't personally believe that Sheila nor Lavina let themselves into Tom's house because they heard a piano. Tom knew exactly what he was doing. He lured them into his house with the piano, and he wanted people to believe that they enjoyed it. His story has been reported that they made their own way in, but this could not be the case. The day prior, he explained to the police officer that he locks his door because he lives alone, and this was confirmed by relatives. But if this really is the case, then how could the girls have just let themselves into his house? Because they didn't. He lured them in, and he lured them in with the intention to commit murder. Tom Lionel Burns was a liar. He tricked the media and the public into believing the girls went in on their own accord. Both bodies were sexually assaulted, and blood was drained from the body before Tom had cut parts off them, which were cooked and eaten. One thing that was not recorded was how and why the police grew suspicious of Tom Burns. There needs to be a reason. My theory is that a neighbour saw him talking to the two girls outside his house as he was luring them into his home. He had every intention to kill them, and it was a pre-orchestrated act of premeditated murder, and premeditated murder is fit for trial. In the end, Tom was found unfit for trial and was described at the time as crazy. I have been speaking to residents from the Barrow in Furness area, and Joe Rush, who is now 81, said Tom Burns had a humped back, and that years prior to committing the murders, Tom Burns was a known taxi driver in the area. Joe described Tom as scruffy, small, and looked of ill health. Myra Rush, who was 19 at the time of the murders, remembers the local stories from that time, and how the police detective who found the girls had soon retired after finding them. Myra went on to say he most likely struggled with the thoughts of what he had discovered. Our research shows Thomas Burns died in Broadmoor Hospital in 1967 at the age of 79, and he is registered to be buried in Windsor. And that, my friends, was the story of the Barrow in Furness Hunchback Killer. Just before the story of the cannibal killer, I asked if you knew how many people it takes for a killer to be considered a serial killer, and the answer is 3. A serial killer is typically a person who murders 3 or more persons, with the murders taking place over more than a month and including a significant period of time in between. Whilst most authorities set a threshold of 3 murders, others extend it to 4, or others lessen it to 2. Welcome to I Could Murder a Quiz. That's right, people. Right now, we're about to have a whole lot of fun as I ask you 5 questions about famous murders from around the world. Okay, so let's get into it. Question number 1 is, in what district of East London did Jack the Ripper prey on women? And now let's move on to question number 2. Which serial killer of boys and young men performed as Pogo the Clown at charity events and children's parties? Question number 3. Which serial killer styled himself the Son of Sam? Question number 4. Which serial killer and doctor murdered at least 215 middle-aged and elderly people by injecting them with overdoses of painkillers? And finally, it's question number 5. What was the serial killer William Hirons known for leaving written messages in? Okay, so let's find out how you did. Question number 1 was, in what district of East London did Jack the Ripper prey on women? And the answer was Whitechapel. If you did that well, give yourself a pat on the back. Question number 2, which serial killer of boys and young men performed as Pogo the Clown at charity events and children's parties? The answer was John Wayne Gacy. Question number 3 was, which serial killer styled himself the Son of Sam? And the answer was David Berkowitz. And question number 4, which serial killer and doctor murdered at least 215 middle-aged and elderly women by injecting them with overdoses of painkillers? And the answer was Harold Shipman. And finally, question number 5 was, what was the serial killer William Hirons known for leaving written messages in what? And the answer was lipstick. Here's an interesting fact. He later became known as the Lipstick Killer. If you got 1 right, give yourself a pat on the back. If you got 2 right, give yourself a high five. If you got 3 right, give me a woo. If you got 4 right, give yourself a round of applause. And if you got 5 right, I hope you feel proud of yourself. Welcome to 5 Freaky Facts. Fact 1. Harold Shipman has the largest victim count in the history of murder. The amount of victims is still unknown, but he did murder at least 250 elderly victims. Harold Shipman fitted perfectly into society, and this feature is exactly how he became the most prolific serial killer of all time. He commits suicide without leaving anybody with his reasons nor motivation for his killings. His suicide caused shockwaves to his victims' family and friends because so many questions were left unanswered. Fact 2. H.H. Holmes, America's first recorded serial killer, would actually sell his victim skeletons to universities and hospitals. Holmes had potentially murdered up to 10 victims, and Holmes had a right-hand man for many of his crimes, a man called Benjamin Pitezel. In the earlier years, Holmes attempted to fake his own death to reap the reward of life insurance, but his plan failed because the insurance company became suspicious. Later, Holmes hatched a plan for Pitezel to fake his death, but the true plan was that Holmes would actually murder Benjamin Pitezel and take the money for himself. 3. In the John Wayne Gacy case, there were so many bodies crammed underneath his house that the bodies had actually melted together, and the bones had to be sorted and organised for more than 2 years to arrange full skeletons. John Wayne Gacy murdered over 33 victims over 11 years and was finally sentenced to death by lethal injection in 1994 at the age of 52. Fact 4. Fred and Rose West, an English serial killing couple, killed up to 12 victims and buried some of them in their own home. Fred confessed to murdering up to 20 victims but did not tell where the bodies were. Instead, he said they're buried around England and he did not reveal any more. In 2014, Donald Trump was tricked into retweeting a picture of Fred and Rosemary West. A fellow Twitter user tagged Trump in a tweet with a photo of the Wests, claiming that they were the user's parents who had passed away and that they had always looked to Donald Trump for inspiration. Trump complied and he retweeted the entire message, not realising that the picture was of the serial killers. Once people pointed out who they were, Trump deleted the tweet and then he threatened to sue the Twitter user. And finally, that brings us to fact number 5. Ted Bundy murdered over 20 women. But did you know that in 1971, while he was a psychology student contemplating a career in law and politics, Bundy began to work at Seattle's Crisis Center, taking telephone calls from those at risk of suicide or facing other emotional difficulties. Isn't that ironic? Thank you so much for checking out this episode of The Kill Room. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and if you want to check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, all you have to do in the search bar is simply search for The Kill Room. There we will pop up, and again, just hit subscribe. If you really like the work that we do, head over to patreon.com/The Kill Room, and there you can support our work even further. But from me to you for now, take care of yourselves, and I will see you all on the next episode of The Kill Room. Bye.